Today, our focus is on schools, not on the dismantling of the Department of Education, which is at the top of the news curve, but on a little noted reform movement that may be even more consequential in the long term for how we educate our children. We are grateful to longtime colleague Louis Friedberg, whose Sparking Equity podcast on schools first alerted us to this trend and who helped organize today's briefing. What first caught my eye was the podcast's headline, Reimagining the School Day. For over a century, the basic structure of the school day and week has been organized around 6 or 7 periods a day, 5 days a week, with each period lasting 40 to 60 minutes. It's something all of us remember from our own school experience, a fact of life we take for granted. But a growing number of educators across the country are rethinking how to restructure the school day. At a time when test scores show worrisome declines, how do we engage students whose learning styles don't always match what the podcast called the division of learning into hourly bites? Despite intense political polarization, their efforts are drawing bipartisan support. To explore this topic today, we have invited 3 guests. Louis Friedberg, longtime education journalist, former editor of EdSource, now executive producer of the Sparking Equity podcast and director of the Advancing Education Success Initiative. For more than 2 decades, Mr. Friedberg has analyzed and reported on local, state, and national education policy. He spent 15 years at the San Francisco Chronicle, including as their Washington correspondent. And before that, he founded Youth News, a precursor to youth radio and the inspiration for pioneering youth journalism. Shalonda Gregory, principal of Midwest High in Oakland, California, which is implementing a model to create innovative learning environments developed by Big Picture Learning. Ms. Gregory has over 20 years' experience in the field of education, beginning her career as a special ed teacher in Kentucky and Washington, D.C. She has a wealth of knowledge in effective teaching and learning. The Midwest High curriculum takes students out of the classroom for much of the week through internships and special assignments. Ann Stanton, president of the Linked Learning Alliance, is developing and implementing programs that make learning more relevant and engaging and prepares students for their careers and life in general. Ms. Stanton has over 20 years' experience working directly with low-income youth and communities as the director of Larkin Street Youth Services in San Francisco and associate executive director of Covenant House in New York City. She also served as the James Irvine Foundation's program director for youth for a decade. We're honored to have you all here today. Reporters, please enter your questions in the chat, and we will answer them after all the panelists have spoken. So, Mr. Friedberg, we begin with you. Please give us an overview of the state of learning in schools and why rethinking the school day is capturing attention in the field of school reform. Your turn, Louis.
Well, so good to be here, Sandy, and I just thank you for that introduction. And I should just say we couldn't go back too far, but you and I worked together very closely, going back to the 80s and 90s at Pacific News Service. So glad to still be uh, working together on this very important project and talking with all of you online and the hugely important work that journalists are doing. One thing I've been gleaning just the last month or two, I think the journalism, people are appreciating even more what journalists are doing, and especially in terms of all the, how shall I say, attacks on the Fifth Estate. So thank you for your work. One of the things I don't have to remind any of you that the country went through, the last traumatic kind of episode was the pandemic. One of the exciting things I won't say exciting, one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic is everybody wanted to get back to school. Everybody is very excited about getting back to school. Even, people who were very critical of public schools, they were like, no, well, they were very upset when kids weren't in school. And I think you can all remember the excitement about going back to school. Well, people went back to school, and what have we seen? We've actually seen chronic absenteeism rates reach record levels. Fortunately, in the last year or so, things have improved somewhat, but we are definitely not back to where we were before. And what happened to all that excitement? What happened when kids came back to school? And I think what that has reinforced is that for many kids, not all kids, the current structure and the learning opportunities that we're offering students are not working, or not working sufficiently for young people to get up every morning and to say they want to go to school. And I'm not saying all the absenteeism is due to motivation. I mean, there's absenteeism due to illness, due to various things, but certainly keeping kids engaged in school is a huge challenge. And I think it presents actually a crisis for public education, not only public education, all forms of education. Now, what's very interesting is that there's something called the Carnegie Unit. If you mention to most people, including, I think, most people in the schools, what is the Carnegie Unit? They would maybe, well, no, they don't really know what that is. Or they may have heard about it, but tell me more. But actually, the Carnegie Unit has shaped how students learn, the structure of the school day, graduation requirements, college admission requirements, financial aid, depending on how you've done in high school, what's reflected on your high school transcript. The Carnegie Unit, as Sandy implied, was basically better known as the credit hour. It was something that the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which is based in Menlo Park in California, but it is a national organization, congressionally mandated, established in 1906. They were trying to figure out, how do we measure what students are learning? How do we measure, what colleges should, the requirements that colleges should establish for admitting students? And they came up with this idea called the Carnegie Unit, which basically said that one unit, one credit hour, was 120 hours of instruction during the year, which means more or less 5 hours, 5 periods a day for 14 weeks. And, yes, that's one credit hour. And you needed to get X number of credit hours, 14 credit hours, in order to graduate for each year. And so this has basically been the way that schools have run all these years. Now, one of the things we have learned, there's been a lot of research over the years in terms of how people learn. We know in terms of cognitive development is that people don't learn at the same rate. Kids and adults, we all learn at different rates. And the notion that we should kind of shoehorn, squeeze learning into these hourly bites, as Sandy says, doesn't really work for all kids. So there's been, and this has been going on for quite several decades, there's been pressures to say, shouldn't we figure out how to give students, first of all, more flexibility in the school day? So it's not this 5 or 6 hours every day for the entire school year. Is there a way also, there's also been a growing recognition that there are lots of other skills that may be more important for how students succeed in the workplace, and not only in the workplace, in life after they graduate. Things like critical thinking, things like being able to work collaboratively with other people, things like being able to persist with a task, to stick with a task, showing independence, to be able to work on your own. So there's lots of skills, and surveys have shown this, that people think, oh, well, that's actually more important if I'm trying to hire somebody than the grades they got in high school. So there's a lot of skills that we really would like to see people leave high school with. One of the questions is there a way to measure that? And there are some exciting innovations going on with the education testing service, that, the organization that does the SAT and all the other college admissions tests. There's some exciting developments about trying to figure out ways to measure those, what I call them, durable skills. These are skills you want students to have throughout their life. And there's 5 states, I'll just mention it, where there's actually pilot projects going on right now in Indiana, Nevada, North Carolina, Rhode Island, and Wisconsin, that the ETS is doing in collaboration with this Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Now, I should also mention that this Carnegie unit that they came up with, the Credit Hour, one of the organizations that is leading the charge to get rid of the Carnegie unit, that's actually what they want to do. They're saying this is now outdated, is the Carnegie Foundation, the very organization that started this, that came up with this idea 120 years ago. 1906, next year will be the 120th anniversary of the Carnegie unit. This is something that's definitely picking up steam across the country. There's something, I'll just throw this out because I think you'd want to look at this in your own states to see if this is being done. 17 states are producing what they call a portrait of a graduate or portrait of a learner, which is saying, what do we want our graduates to leave school with? And not just, did you get A's or B's, or if regrettably failed various subjects, but what are these other broader skills that young people will leave competent to succeed in the workplace? And these portraits of a graduates tend to be broader kind of descriptions of a variety of skills. And in some of these cases, they've actually put these skills into legislation in terms of high school graduation requirements. So you definitely want to look and see what is happening in your state and in your local districts, whether the high school graduation requirements include some of these broader skills. So Sandy, let me just leave it at that.
Well,
And
what's exciting, Louis, is that these are initiatives that people seem to kind of be coming at from within their own lived experiences in the field, as opposed to some great blueprint being handed down from the top. Is that a fair assessment that this
Yes,
is?
and let me, Sandy, I don't know if this is the point you're making. The Department of Education has been more or less missing in action. This is not something that's coming from the federal government, you know? So this movement can still go on regardless of what's happening at the federal level. And it's a state-based, like most of education, state-based and local school districts, and in many cases, in teachers in
Right,
classroom.
right. So we have a couple of questions, Louis. I'm burning with questions, but let me go to the chat. We have a question from Sunita Sarabji. Sunita, will you ask your question?
Thank you, Sandy. Louis, is online learning a factor here? Kids and parents have choices now, like the Khan Academy, for example, which allows students to learn at their own pace. And do you and the other speakers predict that online learning will replace traditional schools at some point?
Well, I'd love to hear Dr. Gregory's answer when she comes up. I think next, but yes, online learning does provide more flexibility. I think it's still very questionable whether that's more effective than in-person learning. I think we can all understand that probably in-person learning is better, but it's part of a toolbox of again thinking about not making it a requirement, because let's say a student is working as an internship, which Dr. Gregory might also will be talking about, is it might be difficult to get to class, so if they can do some of this online, I think that's also obviously one of the byproducts of the pandemic, is that and school districts then also became they acquired the ability to offer courses online. That wasn't the case at all.
Right. Let me go to one more question before we move to Dr. Gregory. Peter Sherman, you have a question. Do you want to share it?
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to reframe how I put it in the chat. I recall maybe 15, 20 years ago, sort of headlines emerging about China, South Korea, East Asian countries surging ahead on STEM. And it created kind of panic in America. And it seems like it sort of changed a lot of how education was done here. And it struck me because it felt like the whole point of education was to essentially drive the national economy, to create cogs to drive the national economy. What you're presenting here seems like a very different sort of approach to education, much more of the classical type of creating well-rounded people. I'm curious, how do we square those two things, particularly given, I mean, Thomas Friedman's column in the New York Times yesterday, that China really owns the future because it has all these STEM graduates. So how do we square this?
Well, I would just say that and Peter, I can't comment on some of the countries you've mentioned, but I do know that there are many other countries around the world that are further ahead than the United States is. Certainly in Europe, the whole apprenticeship system is totally integrated into the school system, so that the students leave high school on a pathway, and in something that they're excited about that doesn't exclude going to college. So I think we can definitely learn from what's happening internationally.
Great. We have other questions, and if our speakers don't mind looking at the questions in the chat, if you want to comment on them, we'll circle back at the conclusion of the formal presentations. But we go now to the front lines with Dr. Shalonda Gregory to talk about the creative learning environment her school Met High is implementing.
Midwest.
MetWeb, sorry. Dr. Gregory, please go ahead and welcome to our briefing.
Hello and good morning, everyone. I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I want everyone to just take a moment and think back to your favorite time in school. And I want you to hold on to that. What was your favorite subject and why? What made this time in school so cool for you? What were the things you enjoyed most in school? So I want you to think about those moments, and I want you to hold on to them for a second. I'm going to share some things that made school really interesting and cool for me. I was a bit of a nerd, but I was a cool nerd, I would say. I don't know if my friends will agree. My friends probably have a lot of stories. So for me, the majority of my schooling, because I was really fortunate to have some really cool teachers amongst some duds. I had a lot of dud teachers, but I had some really cool ones, and they overshadowed the ones that were not so good. And they really created a safe space and a really nurturing space for me to just be myself and learn. Also, I really love to learn. I think because of that culture that they created. And so school was really fun for me. I found a lot of joy in school. And what you probably would never ever assume when you meet me, because typically when people meet me, I'm outgoing, I'm, social, even though I'm not like that all the time, believe it or not. You would never assume that I went to very strict schools. I went to schools that they call in Jefferson County public schools, traditional schools. So anyone from Louisville, Kentucky could tell you all about traditional schools, and they probably would add that they kind of skim from the cream of the crop, per se. They handpick their students, which is why they perform so well on assessments and do well as far as any other measures that are used to measure the success of a school. So that's a little bit about my background. But in that experience of going to traditional schools, I had some really cool experiences. So for example, I love that my first grade teacher, Ms. Dennis, taught us how to make butter. So we learned how to churn the butter. And in that process, we learned about the process of making butter. And of course, we got to eat the butter, which is the most fun, enjoyable moment of that. I can also think back to when I was in PE class. I love PE class. I love PE class mostly because it gave me an opportunity to show my athleticism and to kind of show the boys up. I was born at the end of the late 70s, so I grew up in the 80s, and it was during that time where it was a lot of conversations around, what girls could do versus what boys can do. And I never really adopted that belief or that philosophy around that. I felt that I could do anything a boy could do, and I could do it even better. So I love PE for that opportunity to really kind of showcase my skills. But I love science class. As I kind of referred to earlier, I was a bit of a nerd. So I really enjoy science because of the science labs that we got to participate in and all the experimenting. And it really fueled my passion of me wanting to become a doctor. I actually went to college to be a medical doctor. I know, shocker. I wanted to be an endocrinologist because both of my parents were diabetics, and I saw how diabetes really impacted their lives. And so that's what I wanted to do. So science was one of those classes where I was just like, oh, just all in, loved and ate every minute of it. But more importantly, it was the experiences that I was having, right? And that's the whole reason why I got into education. That is the reason why I got in. And when I was a teacher, and even now as a principal, part of my goal is to normalize joy in schools. That is a sure, quick way in which you can engage students into the work to make it fun. It's not about just it being relevant or it being rigorous. It's also about it being engaging. It's about being connected to the things they're interested in, specifically their passions, even their cultural backgrounds, all the things that make us human and make us uniquely ourselves, is what we really should be trying to connect to when we're teaching in schools. And so that's one of the beautiful things that I love about the school that I lead. At Met West, I feel like we do a really good job of that. So it is my personal philosophy that school should be fun. And yes, you know, it should have rigor and all those things, but it should be engaging and it should be fun, most importantly. I've been in education for 21 years, and I've taught students with learning and behavior disorders. I've coached teachers as an instructional coach. I've been an assistant principal. I've been at every level. I've been at elementary, middle, and high school. And I'm really proud to leave a really innovative and non-traditional school in Oakland, California. And the name of that school is Met West High School. And I'm very passionate about teaching and learning, and even more passionate about inspiring and empowering young folk to be dream catchers. And I use the word dream catchers because I don't want them just to chase their dreams. That is one of the things that we really do well at Big Picture Learning Schools. We really empower students to dream, but a dream is just a dream if you don't put action behind it. So one of the things that we do at my school, every student starting in 9th grade creates an individual learning plan in which they do goal setting. And we talk specifically not only about the things they dream about as far as careers or education beyond high school, but also like who is the person that you want to be? How do you want to show up in this world? And really getting really clear about that. And then we amend that and change it over time as we go throughout. So that's part of like not only having the dream, but and not just chasing the dream, but also just like capturing that. So achieving your goals basically. And seated in that, I think one of the things that really like motivates me and drives me as a leader is that I really do believe that students can achieve at high levels. I think that we take multiple roads to get there, and which is why it's really important that as educators that we meet students where they are, right? Because everyone is coming to us with different experiences, different cultural backgrounds. They come with their own sense of knowledge and being. And all those things are really important. And we need to be cognizant of that and be able to meet them where they are and then help to coach and support and lift them up to the place that they want to be.
So, Dr. Gregory, a key question. When Mr. Friedberg went to the school, he saw it as a real sort of on-the-ground example of what happens when you break down that rigid Carnegie unit structure of the school day and you reimagine not 5 or 6 50-minute sort of bites, but you're much more open and expansive. Could you just briefly tell us how the school curriculum has changed under this development of a new learning environment?
Yes, I would love to. So our school model uses the big picture learning model, and we don't really like to call it a model. It's really more so of a design, because you will never find two big picture schools that are exactly the same. And at the core of what we do, we empower students to dream, of course, and we actually really help them to get them to see that learning should be by your design. So for instance, if a student is really interested in wanting to become an architect, what we do is say, okay, so what are all the things that you need to do to become an architect? And then we also try to find in our core content classes, which would be your standard classes, English, math, science, social studies. We try to find ways to connect that interest embedded in what we're teaching in those classes. And then we also provide a very unique opportunity in which students can secure internships. So the student that I mentioned that is like really passionate about being an architect, then we would help them to find an internship with an architect or an architect firm or anyone that is in that industry.
And would that internship take the place of being in school for so many hours?
Yes, so our students are out of the building at their internship 2 days a week. So they only receive core instruction, again, which is your basic classes that you have in school, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And every Tuesday and Thursdays, our students are out having these really rich, authentic work-based learning experiences under a mentor, which is also, you know, the way that we sit at the district, we call them community partners or industry experts. And so the student is being mentored by this expert in this field and learning specific job skills. But one thing I want to say that really separates all big picture schools from what you would see at a high school that has what Ms. Ann will talk about in a second are the pathways. Because in Oakland Unified, every high school has to have a pathway. And that is pretty much most of the school districts I've worked in, that's the norm. Every high school has, you know, pathways. We are a very small school and we're small by design. So we don't have multiple pathways. So our students are exploring the career opportunities through these internships. And so unlike, let's say, a large high school here in Oakland, which on average would have a maybe 3 to 5 different pathways, our students, and so at those schools, students are only being able to experience those industry sectors. But at my school, for instance, our students are able to experience anywhere from 19 to 20 different pathways, industry sectors, because of this opportunity to go out every Tuesday and Thursday to experience this real world learning in real time.
So, Louis Friedberg, how do you see what Dr. Gregory is developing in this breaking out of the everything has to be in the school in this Carnegie unit? How do you see this impacting other schools in Oakland? And how would you just connect this to the movement of restructuring the school day?
Well, it's a great example that students can be out of the class for 2 days a week and they still graduate, right, Dr. Gregory?
Yeah, not only do they graduate, and something that we're really proud of, they're not just graduating with their diploma. I have several students that have graduated with both their diploma and their associate's degree. They also are leaving us with a host of career-ready skills. So for instance, one of my seniors that is about to graduate in May, he has been interning at a skateboard shop. But in the prior years, he's also interned at auto shops, whether it's like an auto shop that specifically works on repairs, as far as like a collision repair, like the face of the car, or actual like fixing brakes and things of that nature. Because of those opportunities he has, one, he already has a job. He already has a job when he graduates in May. He's going to work at the skateboard shop because he's really passionate about skateboarding. That's his jam. But Johnny is also a very gifted artist and he's really good with his hands. So what he currently does is, because of the experiences he had at the internship, he works on cars as a side hustle. So he puts a little extra money in his pockets because he's learned some skills that are invaluable that can help you know, fuel his future. So they're graduating not only with a high school diploma, potentially an associate's degree, but they're also leaving with what we like to call life skills as well as career ready skills. So
and if I could, Dr. Gregory, if I can just mention, you mentioned the big picture schools. You are part of a network. There's an organization called Big Picture Learning, which has about 100 schools around the country that has this model of internships as part of the school day, and there's other features. But so this is happening across the country, but not enough.
Well, there's so many questions now in the chat. Dr. Gregory, could you look at the questions in the chat? And then we'll circle back after our third speaker, and we'll have probably 10 minutes for additional questions. But let me move on now to our third speaker, Ann Stanton, who will talk about linked learning. What inspired her to develop or become a pioneer in this field? How does linked learning work? And where does she see the efforts we're discussing, like those at Dr. Gregory's school, the whole idea of rethinking the school day? What does she see as the future of this movement? Big questions. Ms. Stanton.
Thank you, Sandy, and just an honor to be here in company with Louis and Dr. Shalonda. I'm going to take people back a little bit in terms of a journey, because I think it's helpful to understand the context for the work, how it evolved, and ultimately where we are today. I, as Sandy so generously described in my past, worked extensively with young people that were at the furthest of margins, right? Marginally housed youth, homeless youth, foster youth, building in New York City as well as San Francisco, building comprehensive systems to reconnect them to education, to employment, to be housed, right? And when I had the privilege to move into a role in leadership at the James Irvine Foundation in California, wonderful statewide philanthropy, I had the chance to really think about what I learned and to think about how did that impact the young people that we and I am absolutely passionate about. Young people in the decade of life between the ages of 14 and 24. It is a decade of difference for those young people. It is as important as the TK to kindergarten years, going through same developmental brain development, sociological development, et cetera. And so how do we really begin to think about how do we redesign learning so that young people don't get to the end of the game undereducated and underemployable, right? So we began this journey to create and think about what would the world look like. And I'm going back 10, 12 years so people can understand. At that point in time of 15 years, it was very, very bifurcated. People were either focused on college ready or career ready. And all young people were, frankly, based on a 50s model, sorted. And I can tell you who was sorted into vocational education and who was sorted into the college tracks in high schools, right? And so we wanted to really invest in, okay, there is power in both of those. What happens if we invest heavily in a new structure of really creating the and for young people? We are preparing all young people for success in college and career and civic life. And we wanted to experiment with it at a systems level, we did some work at school level. We wanted to say, okay, what would happen if we really began to look at the enabling conditions in school districts and school systems, from small rural districts to large urban districts like Oakland and LA, and small districts like a very small rural district in California called Porterville, and really see what would happen if people changed the way they delivered education with 4 core components. 1, rigorous academics, so that no young person was not meeting the gatekeeper role of getting into UC, to CSUs or community colleges. They had all options available. At the same time, their learning was integrated, their academics were integrated into a career program of study tied to the California industries writ large. So those are broad industries, from agriculture and natural resources to arts, media, and entertainment, to science and technology, right? So how do we begin to really integrate that learning so that young people are getting both rigorous academics and also a very relevant pathway of study and delivering a program of study? But also, more importantly, we realized that the work to try to get to the and required that it wasn't just one teacher doing this. Like, there had to be a whole community involved in being able to deliver what are 2 other essential elements. One is a whole child approach, so that their integrated services, counseling, supports are very much part of building that family environment and that sense of supports for young people. And more importantly, we need to bring the business community into that to make sure that young people had the opportunities to experience what they were learning academically in their classrooms to what was happening and how they could apply it in the real world, right? So we began this experiment. We did a very comprehensive evaluation of it, an independent study of it, and saw tremendous gains, particularly for young people that started high school behind, both in terms of college-going behavior, in terms of academic success, graduation success. Many of the the experiences that we've talked about, the durable skills. How do we measure that? What does a young person learn through very connected learning and project-based approaches that allow young people to apply and work together to meet their goals, right? And again, how do we evaluate learning, right? How do we take, and I think, you know, we've heard such rich examples, but ultimately, what are we evaluating? Certainly, we're evaluating a young person's academic success, but we should also be evaluating the competencies that they've developed through their opportunities in work-based learning, the skills that they've built, the professional networks they've been able to build, the kind of supports that they've needed, right? How do we help young people get to accelerated college experiences so that every young person in a linked learning pathway, for example, has to, you know, is being delivered on 12 credits of post-secondary education, right? So all of those things are critically important, and those require us rethinking the day, the hours in the day, rethinking who the teachers are and the learners are, rethinking the walls to schools to let in the community and also let young people out into the community to learn, right? But the impact of it is really, you know, tremendously significant. The partnerships that are available in California alone right now, we are looking at the work in 80 school districts in California, 600 educational pathways, each of which serve roughly like between 300 and 400 young people. There's 250 schools in California alone serving at a system level 330,000 young people, right? So that is really significant. We are constantly learning, and we are constantly trying to ensure that we are also informing policy, as practice informs policy. So we have now another huge investment at the state level called the Golden State Pathways Program, which is very based on the evidence that has been developed in linked learning and the core quality standard of what a high quality experience looks like for an adolescent, right? What's their self-agency? What do they deserve? What are they getting based on the adults rather than just serving the adults, right? So it has been powerful, and we are now, I think, poised and very excited with the infusion of $500 million through the Golden State Pathways. Here we are at 330,000 young people. We'd like to get to 600,000 young people in California having these experiences. We know that we can't do it alone. We know that, you know, I would say to journalists out there, as you think about big takeaways, and I think Dr. Shalonda would agree with me on this, we need to think about, obviously, you know, practice informing policies, right? What is working in communities across the state and country to better serve young people, to have them engaged, to have them have an equal role in learning, which is critically important. I think the value and credit earned for experiences outside of the classroom, for work-based learning, for internships, right? How do we value what's on a high school diploma and the academic? How do we equally value the career-connected abilities and competencies that young people have gotten? Because I think that's hugely important and still another area we can all build on. And I think, you know, as a hope, I will put this out there. I am passionate about adolescence, and I know I'm not the only person on this that is here. I would love to see journalists help us reframe the narrative of adolescence as assets. These young people at this period in their lives are the most creative, their brains are continuing to develop. They can contribute in so many ways. And in our country, we think a lot less of what a 16-year-old can do, right, than we do in other countries like Lewis talked about, right? So I think that's really important. And the other piece I would say is all of the dreams we have about the ability to break down silos and have the kind of experiences young people to apply their academic learning in the real world really requires just a deeper engagement in our country of employers in that social compact, right? Who's providing these opportunities for young people? Why aren't we getting closer to doing that at scale? Some of it has to do with the day and the way we structure it, but some of it has to do with the supply of those opportunities for young people. So those are just, I think it's a really hopeful narrative about what can change when people are working together as a movement. I believe we're all on the same path together. And the potential for impact is really huge if we get to the end of preparing all young people for both college and career versus the and recognizing just what an asset that decade of life is to our future, to our economy, to our communities.
Thank you. Just for the purposes of imagining how these changes, this opening up of the school, for so long, even parents were discouraged, I remember, in the 80s from getting involved with the schools. It was seen as sort of a distraction. I'm talking about schools that were not affluent suburban parents engaging, but the schools that really worked with young people whose parents worked all the time and didn't have time, but did want to be engaged. Now this whole idea of opening schools up to the community, of engaging people in education beyond those Carnegie units. How does a school or a district begin to adapt these kind of programs? And has linked learning found there's growing interest in a school district? How do you approach a school district to encourage them to begin experimenting?
It's a great question, Sandy. I think that, ultimately it starts with a shared vision and a community of what they want. To Lewis's point, what do they want young people to be able to do and learn at the end of their experience in high school, right? And then how are we creating seamless transitions to the next step? I mean, that's the thing. High school is not the end game, right? Like, how are we accelerating experiences for young people that get them closer to post-secondary attainment at a faster pace? How do we prepare? How do we build on apprenticeship so young people are starting, on an apprenticeship pathway earlier, right? So all of those things, I think, it's a shared vision of what a community wants for their young people. And that includes and should include the voices of parents and young people themselves and educators, right? I think there are enabling conditions in systems that, really help people to structure the time in a day to make it happen more easily. Time for teachers to plan together, right? Time for people to deliver the kind of education, rethink the master schedule. Some of these are obviously ways that some people are like, oh my God, these are sacred cows. But the reality is people do it, right? And they do it because they're trying to get to a greater vision for young people, right? So part of it's structural changes, part of it's time changes, and part of it's a collective will to make the changes in the way people operate, the adults operate in the system on a day-to-day basis, right? To ensure that more young people are moving towards that end. I think for all parents want their children to succeed in both college and career. It's not like an end game. It's like, we want both. We want to see our child fully with self-agency and able to be on their own. So I think vision is there. I think really working to build a vertical, like, stable, sustainability, as well as a horizontal, like, as you know, superintendents turn over every 2 years in school districts often, right? So who owns this vision? And if it's owned by families, if it's owned by communities, if it's owned by employers, you can't break it down. People will continue to push for that no matter who the leadership is, because they want what they want for their children.
Great. Let me now open this up to questions from our media on the call, some of which have been extremely good in the chat. And thank you, Dr. Gregory, especially for the answers you're providing. It would be great if all of our speakers took a moment and just looked at at questions you may want to respond to on the chat. But in the meantime, let me ask Louis Friedberg, how do we take what are these exciting, innovative approaches to learning and understand how school districts actually can begin, how we as parents or we as journalists or we as people passionate about educating kids, how can we take this idea and essentially understand what it will require at a time of monumental changes going on at the federal level? How can we still make this begin to become an accelerated, successful approach to learning in the schools? People tend to be very resistant to change, and the notion of even changing something as foundational as how we think about the school day, the idea that we're actually going to make this a kind of incentivize schools to begin to adapt this. Do you see this happening? And despite the kind of very draconian cuts that are happening at the federal level?
Yeah, and if I can, I mean, Sandy, you point out correctly, changing anything is hard, any change, and particularly something that is so entrenched in the American education system. And obviously there are reasons to have the current system. It's probably more convenient, as Dr. Gregory probably say, that to have everything regimented like that. Once you have flexibilities and students out on internships, and you have interdisciplinary projects and classes that stretch across more periods, it's going to take more work to do that. But I think the evidence is that the payoff is significant. I think the good news is that this is accelerating. I think when you see like the big picture schools, 100 of them, and growing, the work that Stanton is doing with the Linked Learning Alliance, those kinds of partnerships between industry and schools, that's growing. The fact that the Education Testing Service is now looking at setting up ways to actually measure this and try to get it onto transcripts. There's something called Mastery Transcript. I'd recommend you could look at an organization that actually the Education Testing Service has bought. And so I think there's been talk about moving in this direction for several decades, and I think now it seems to be accelerating. And I'll just say, I think journalists can play an important role in this. Looking at, okay, in your state, what are the graduation requirements? And often, there's legislation that says it should be more, what a graduate should learn is more than just the test scores, but then to what extent is that translated into the actual graduation requirements? And looking at what is local school districts doing in your local school district. Are there innovative projects along these lines? And if not, why not? Because I think that, and by the way, just last point, what's interesting about this is an area of bipartisan, where there's a lot of bipartisan agreement. The right wing has been very much like, and certainly with college, but are we preparing kids for the workplace? And all the criticism of public schools. And I think this is not a left or a right or Republican or Democrat issue. I think this is really an arena where there's potential for working across the political aisle.
Great. Thank
And
you.
Sandy,
Yes.
I would just add to that if I can, like
Please.
I underscoring what Louis is saying is like, I think journalism can also play a really important part in like telling stories about where this is working. Because in districts, as you all asked, or schools, where do people want to embrace this? Is because they see what's happening in schools next to them or districts next to them, in terms of student engagement, community engagement. There's so many ways that we can tell stories, and most importantly, like, I think we have to tell the stories of young people's experiences. Young people are better able than any of us to talk about the difference that they experience, the way they feel in these environments, their successes in the environments, the outcomes of these environments for them. And it's really powerful, versus often what you hear from others describing what their high school experience has been like, right? So I think telling stories about where this is working, shining a light on the impact it's having in communities across the nation, and also raising the voices of teachers who are fully embracing this,
Right.
as this is the way I want to teach.
So a day in the life of Dr. Shalonda Gregory would, a day in the school life would probably be a very compelling way of seeing how this is actually. Be careful, because I don't want to suddenly inundate you with journalistic requests.
Yeah,
But
no worries.
Dr. Gregory, how are parents of the students at your school responding? And can you give us an example maybe of a student who came in, as Lewis said, not excited to be there whatsoever, but now is kind of, and if this had not been spring break, I would have asked you to bring one of your students onto the call. But could you just give us your final thoughts on how is this going over in your community of parents, and an example of a student who really exemplifies the benefit of this approach?
Yes, I would love to. And I actually want to go back to something that Miss Ann just shared. Believe it or not, in my school district, we are the only school that has this unique model. And also, there are a lot of families that don't know that we even exist in Oakland Unified School District. And it's because of the lack of storytelling, the lack of attention that has been brought. This school will be 23 years old in August. And a lot of the things that Oakland Unified is doing now through our linked learning initiatives, they have been modeled after what Met West started 23 years ago. The work-based learning that is taking place in all of the high schools, the capstone, that all came from things that we were doing at Met West when we started at Laney College in the basement. But the families that do know about us, because the way families learn about us a lot of time is word of mouth, because their students has had this really rich, authentic learning experience at the school. And again, I think it's something to point out. Yes, back when schools were started, when Carnegie had this wonderful idea about this, credit, this unit, it was to fuel the workforce, but you cannot have a workforce without people. And in order for people to be really good workers, they need to be really good people, well-rounded people. They have to have a host of resources. So one of the things that we focus on in my school is being able to do that really well, right? It's being able to really focus on the whole child, in catering to the whole child and involving their families in that. And I think families find a lot of value in that. And so one of the things that I'm really focused on moving into this next school year, in which we've already started doing this work, is rebranding the school, like doing our own storytelling, creating our own narrative around the amazing work that our students participate in every day, and how it's really impacting their lives. I would have loved to have brought at least one of my students, even though I have many, that can tell you how this experience at Met West has really influenced the way in which they're, journeying through this life and the choices that they're making post-secondary. Again, a lot of students.
So let me just say, around graduation time, we would love to do a briefing just with your students and have them tell those stories. I think our media would also welcome a chance to meet and hear directly from them about what happens when you do reimagine the school day. We're so short on time. We're already 1 minute past the hour. let me ask each of you for a 30-second soundbite, and I hate to put you all on the spot, but imagine yourself in the newsroom. What would the headline for today's briefing, what would you like to see the headline be for the stories our media will be reporting? And let's start with Louis, as a longtime journalist.
Increasing student success by rethinking the school day.
Okay, that is, I'm going to steal that, Louis. That's very good. Thank you. And Dr. Gregory, a headline that you would like to see in one of our media.
That is a good
You
question.
had a wonderful dream catchers.
Yeah,
You can still dream about your future while you're
the headline would be student-centered, passion-driven.
wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna hire you all as headline writers, which is so much a key part of what we do. And Stanton, what would you want to see as the
I would say the power of plus, reimagining high schools to serve our greatest asset, adolescents.
That's wonderful, and that's a great note and a hopeful note to end on. And I just want to thank our three speakers so much for giving us this wonderful hour to think also outside the box for many of us to take this whole topic and see it through a lens of possibility has been very exciting and inspiring. Thank you so much. Our conference has to end too soon. Thank you so much.